Take your seats, well actually go to your seats and stand for the Councillor Karakia and affirmation, and thank you Councillor Lemon for reading this for us.
Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia makinikina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai. E hia aki ana te atakura, he teo, he huka, he hauhu, teihei, Māori ora. Let us affirm today that we as councillors will work together to serve the citizens of Selwyn District, to always use our gifts of understanding, courage, common sense, wisdom and integrity in all our discussions, dealings and decisions so that we may solve problems effectively. May we always recognise each other's values and opinions, be fair-minded and ready to listen to each other's points of view. In our dealings with each other, let us always be open to the truth of others and ready to seek agreement, slow to take offence and always prepared to forgive. May we always work to enhance the well-being of the Selwyn District and its communities.
Good on, Murray, thank you for that. So it's Wednesday the 10th of March, council meeting. There are, sorry Deborah?
Conflicts of interest?
Yep.
Liquor licensing reports. And I have a query over plan change 73 requested for Rolleston.
Cool. Do you want to raise that now, and then we can give you some advice?
Appropriate to raise it now?
You raise it now, Deborah.
Okay. Back in 2012, when it was under the ownership of the Selwyn Plantation Board, I walked away from the council table and became a submitter in the process, requesting that this rezoning be declined or consider seriously the reverse sensitivity issues of the homes blocks, especially bordering the Pine Sewage Treatment Plant. I've read the report that's on the council table, and I do have some concerns from the original proposal, in which the buffer zone for odour seems to have decreased from 150 to 75 in this proposal, and the density...
sorry, Deborah, just in the matter of the conflict,
yeah, but
you're saying because you previously submitted against a previous proposal, whether or not you have a conflict with this current proposal?
Yes, because the density is being proposed to be increased substantially from the decision that was actually outcome from what I actually submitted on. So...
Okay. Tim, do you have some advice?
Thanks, Mayor. I don't think there's a black and white answer for this. My personal view would be that there wouldn't be a conflict at this stage, because this is a procedural decision whether to accept or reject the plan change. And also in terms of policy, my understanding of the law is that the conflict issues, councils are allowed to have their own sort of policy positions on a plan change type of process. But given this is a procedural decision today, I don't believe there is a conflict, but happy to take further advice or other views.
Okay, so there's the advice for you, Deborah. If you still wish to step away, you're welcome to, but I agree with Tim and I don't believe there's an issue. It's a new application and a new process. There's no apologies today, we're all present. There's been no identification of any extraordinary business not on the agenda. Are there any further conflicts of interest that anyone else has that I'd like to raise? So we get to our public forum, and I'd like to welcome and speak to Peter Cooper from the New Zealand Police along today. Peter, thank you for coming on down. You join us at the front table. Yeah. Peter, if you just press the button on the right-hand side of the microphone to turn it on and press it again to turn it off. We've allowed some time here to listen to you and have a bit of an update on how things are feeling for the police across the district, and then a chance for some question and answers as well. And this is live streamed, and there'll be people that are watching that, and it's also recorded, so just so you're aware.
Well, I'm not good with microphones. Is that any good? You can hear me? Yeah. Your reaction to what you get when most people see a police and behind them. Normally it's in a motor vehicle, though. Having been in that space first on the road, Council, anyway, I'll stop there. I thank you very much for the opportunity. I think these are just really good opportunities for police, particularly just to give a bit of an update on some of the things we see, we hear, and we feel in the community, and a bit of a temperature take sometimes. And we very much value the communication and relationships we have with councils, and we're really keen to keep those strong when we go forward. I just wanted to touch on something nationally. Just that was an interaction between our new Commissioner, Andy Costa, and a member of the opposition, who will remain nameless. And I was not impressed with that conversation. And I'll just highlight that's not the relationship we enjoy on these levels. So we're really lucky to have that open and free conversation. I don't know about many in the room, but I had no idea what a wokester was. I had to Google that, get an impression of it. And I mentioned that that conversation because my new commissioner is a product of where we are as communities and where we are going in the future. It's not about the past and where we've been and how we've policed before. He's refreshing about how we're going to police in the future to meet what current demands and current feeling in the community is. And he was down just recently, so I had the opportunity to ask him a few questions. And he talks very much around, there are different parts of a pendulum. One where we want everybody to be held to account and taken before the court and prosecuted to the full letter. And there's people who sit at that end. And then there's the others who, at the other end of the spectrum, want everyone to be rehabilitated, no one to be punished, and to be no stick. So somewhere in the middle is the truth about where policing wants to be and where he wants to take us. So we're in a position, I believe, where we aren't modernising. In fact, we're actually looking to the past. And it was mentioned just in the lunchroom here as I arrived, policing by consent. And it came out in the 1850s with the first Commissioner of Police, a guy Peel from England, who had some pretty good ideas, and we still operate by that. And Andy's view of the world, Andy Costa's view of the world, is that we have to continue to strengthen that ability to police by consent, which simply boils down to, if we lose the trust, confidence, and belief of our communities that we're doing the right things by you and for you, then our role is over and we can no longer continue to police New Zealand. So I like that spirit, and I just thought I'd mention that. In that spirit, Andy released a new focus around gangs and what we can do about that. He's called it Operation Ferio, which I've probably done no justice to in the way I've said it, but I apologise for that. And it's a focus that came for him out of many conversations around the arms buyback that came from recent events in Canterbury that triggered a lot of that, and the feeling that came across that we were taking firearms off good people and not addressing the other side of that coin. And he is very much in the focus to redefine our thoughts around gangs and firearms, to deal with what we see in the news far too many times around New Zealand. And Selwyn, unfortunately, is no different, as the presence, authority and influence of organised crime. And they wear patches and they wear brands and they have meetings and they have minutes and they have very organised systems. They are motorcycle gangs, basically, of the past who have become much, much more ingrained in New Zealand society. They are the people who are holding illegal firearms. They are the people who are making our communities feel incredibly unsafe and live in some fear. So nothing new in us focusing on gangs, but it is a little bit new in how we're going to do it. So the word Ferio is in two parts. The first part means wrongdoing, and the second part is about protecting and caring. So putting those two together in that statement is where we are, and it reflects the pendulum that I spoke about as well. Is we can't continue to go to war with our gangs. There's a time for that, but it's not successful. Just in my own time, which is coming up to 36 years of it, we've been arguing, fighting with gangs all that time, and they're still here. they're still just as powerful and still just as influential. So we're going to try something else. And it doesn't mean that, as a certain member of the opposition told him, that we are soft on crime. It means we are trying to work about causation of crime and how we might do that. So I tell this story because we have significant numbers of gang members living in Selwyn. We have a fortified pad, for lack of better words, on Main South Road, and we have a number of associates and quite highly placed members of gangs living in Selwyn district. Present in our district here, in our communities, is the headhunters, tribesmen, banditos, mongrel mob, black power, and I'm missing a couple on that conversation, but they are here and they are making money and living their lives based around crime. And I can say that with some honesty. I was a little late today. I stopped a motorbike rider on one of the nearby roads here who was unemployed, but his bike had to be worth $40,000, and I can only make a guess where he makes his money. So they're here. So look, we can continue to enforce them, and we will, around their violence and their firearms and what they're doing in that community-wise. But the piece that I like from the new intervention is how we can build resilience in the communities to gang membership, and how we can stop young members of New Zealand society, particularly young Māori boys, from joining a gang looking for that place of belonging, looking for that mana, looking for that. So how can we intervene in that? And in essence, New Zealand Police may not be the right organisation for that, but we certainly have a part to play in how we encourage that. And I very, very strongly believe that communities and councils who represent those communities, that's where the best power can be. We can break that cycle of gang membership. So that is the opportunity of the future. There will be more and more conversations about what we can do in that space as communities and community leaders. So it will be my intention to come back and talk about what any long-term planning opportunities and interests there may be and what we could do in that space. So watch the space. Ferio will be spoken about a lot, and it will be something we want to continue to be in. So that's sort of a bit of a national picture. Selwyn-wise, and demand still continues. I said to someone earlier, I don't think I'll ever be made redundant, and I think we're always going to need police, even though we're the one organisation that tries to do away with itself. Our goal is never to see you again, not to have repeat clientele, but that's a long-term goal, maybe one day. In our own district, there are a few focuses that continue. Last year was another bad year on our roads. In the area I cover of Canterbury Rural, there was 18 Cantabrians who never went home. A lot of them died for the same reasons, which was speed and intersections. They were particularly bad last year. You'll see some attention being paid by local staff here on those intersections and speed. We have to have that strong enforcement part to this to try and educate our people that that's what it's about. But last year was a tough year for the staff. They went to a lot of very, very high speed and very horrible crashes. And this year hasn't gone any better. We started with a truck crash on Dunsandel Main South Road in recent weeks, which was also pretty horrendous. So on behalf of the people that work for us in New Zealand Police, I just want to say that they do pretty good jobs at these crashes. I'd love them never to have to go to them. So there'll be more conversation about, and you'll see more enforcement and media coverage from us about the danger of intersections in Selwyn, which is no surprise to many in the room, and it's no surprise around speed. The most dangerous thing on our road is a human being behind the wheel. So that's what we're about. Look, there was a line out of the road strategy I like very much, and I always mention it in this conversation, is that no New Zealander should have to die on our roads because they make a mistake. And often that's what we see here. So the long-term goal is that to make a road system where mistakes don't cost you your life. So be prepared. There'll be more and more conversation in that space. Crime in Selwyn overall is down 9% against the same time last year. You live if you read the media, and the least crime place in New Zealand. So that's great. Celebrate that as a fact compared to others. But it doesn't mean that there's not another side to that demand picture. So currently we spend 51% of our police resource time in family harm and 21% of it in mental health. They are growth periods, so we're spending 72% of our resources in fields around the home and around how people are feeling in our communities. Unfortunately, the rural parts of Canterbury are very attractive to people who have made that ultimate sad decision to take their own lives. As of yesterday, we were dealing with an attempted suicide in a vehicle, and that is a growth part of society that I'd love to see diminished. But there are a lot of reasons behind every single one of those, but we are having a lot of mental health issues that are in major crisis. So that's one of our bigger things. Family harm, we have become the parenting arm as well these days. There are more and more calls to problem children in the home. So 14 and 15-year-olds who parents can't control. We seem to be seeing quite a lot of that, not just in Selwyn, but around New Zealand. It's an issue that we are starting to be asked to perform roles that traditionally parents would do. Now it's falling to police. So there's a lot of social activity in New Zealand Police, which isn't a bad thing. That's pretty much where we are as an organisation. We are much more in a social space. So there is a lot of that, and we are dealing with a lot of families under pressure, both financially before and even more post the COVID lockdowns. The picture painted of the higher employment and the unemployment not being there, we see a different picture. We see a lot of stress in people who've had small businesses or are very indebted, trying their best to get through. And some of that stress is certainly showing in the family harm space. And anecdotally, without any real science behind this, and a consumption of alcohol. I think our supermarkets in Selwyn do very well in alcohol trades, as does other supermarkets around New Zealand, but there is a bit of pressure there. As an organisation, we're not blind to the fact of the need to respond to even the smallest crime. One of the bigger pressure points for us is social media at the moment. A lot of Facebook commentary seems to be coming our way and to other organisations as well. I'm not quite sure when Facebook became the holy grail of truth, but people seem to think it is. I encourage all of my staff not to be on community-based Facebook pages because the commentary isn't pleasant, and it's not accurate, and it's not fair, and it does affect their morale as they try to do really hard jobs. They don't get that feel sometimes from those pages. So just raise that. But in saying that, we don't ignore the fact that people find small things, their car broken into in their driveway, their building site having the copper taken away from it. These are crimes that affect people, so we don't just diminish that impact on people. And well, I just wanted to say that what you see and hear on community pages is perception versus reality, and the reality is often a lot better than the perception. Again, in saying that, the fear of crime is something that's really real in people, and we need to acknowledge that and make sure people continue. So my last words to you, lucky you live in a safe community, and I'd love to keep it that way. And as growth and more and more people come to Selwyn, it changes the dynamics of how we police and the kind of communities we have. So that's pretty much me as a short little waffly update, but open to answer any questions you might have about what's going on that I haven't covered.
Thanks, Peter, and thank you for the honesty and the clarity that you've shared with us today. It certainly is all about partnership, and you've spoken about that. And on next Friday, we're meeting with District Commander John Price with the Mayors of Canterbury just to talk about how we continue to work together in a space where things can sometimes fall on one or the other of us, but actually when we hold hands and work together, we can have much better outcomes for our community. So I appreciate the work you do here for us, but we're also in conversations with others as well. Murray Lemon, Shane Paha.
Yeah, kia ora, Peter. Thanks for the update. Really appreciate it. Just a quick statement, I guess. Appreciate, that there's pressure coming on illegal firearms, but it's privileged to own a firearm, and that's something we should all remember. Those of us who've got the privilege of having a license, we should cherish what a privilege that is. Really like the approach that seems to be coming through around policing, and part of that's reactive, I guess, to what you see in your communities. And with that in mind, we had a member of the police force as part of my local Lions group and gave a very generalised talk, obviously with no specifics, about the very issues that you talk about in your daily lives. And what struck home to me about that was the impact it had upon him. He kept saying, oh, well, that's just the way it is, and, it doesn't affect us. Well, clearly it did affect him. And is that something that you increasingly, you see things that we would like to pretend don't happen, being blunt, and hear things and witness things. What increased focus, I imagine it's not been something in the past. You talked about, the old days and the current days. What support is there now for your officers to deal with those issues? Because they're significant.
Yeah, it's a good question. It was put to me as I made my speech about how many fatals we'd had, that I'd actually been to all of them. So in that period, I've been to, I think it was 17. I might have missed one. 17 of the crashes. So it does have an effect. You are seeing things that you don't need to see, but it is actually the family part of that. It is the response from who's left behind that's the hardest for the staff to deal with. So I'll just tell a little story very quickly. But when my father died, when I was very new to the police, I was 20 at the time, and the response, he died when I was on night shift. The response from my supervisor was, "Come with me, young fellow, I'll open up the bar, you need a whiskey." And I went, there's two things I don't need. That's one of them is a whiskey, and the other one's the patronising kind of response. So we've come a long way from that. We have 2 dedicated welfare officers who work with us directly. We have a rehabilitation specialist who works through both, not just people who need to come back from work from injury, but from mental health issues as well. And we have check-ins for our staff regularly with psychologists. We have a team of 8 psychologists in Canterbury we use, and they're pretty busy people. So we've come a long, long way from where we used to be. It is not acceptable to go home, get drunk, and tell your family about it like it used to be in the 1980s. Now we are, as I like to think all of the cops that work in our district are about, we're just open and honest and part of the community. And what we see is unpleasant, but it may sound weird, but it's what we're here for. It's why we did it. We like that kind of thing. And cops as a generalisation are total adrenaline junkies, so that's why we do it. But we're very mindful of burnout and appreciate that kind of question. It shows the community does care for us, so appreciate that.
Kia ora. Tere te mihi kia koe e Peter. Kaimahi o Pirihimana o Aotearoa. Tēnā koutou katoa. Peter, I really appreciate your kōrero today. Very sobering, very real, and something that isn't often spoken about a lot of the time. And I really appreciate your honesty. I appreciate the shift in mindset and the way that policing is going to change into the future. And as the chair of Te Punua Te Hindepo, the Youth Justice Residents for the Liaison Committee there, they're also changing the way that they staff, and the program is called Whakamana Tangata. So it's about, I guess, a mana-based approach, and you've spoken about the attraction of young Māori men seeking mana and engaging with gangs. So I really appreciate your kōrero today. I think all of us will take a lot away from that, including our public online. So kia kaha in your mahi as well, and really appreciate that. I just have a couple of questions. Have you seen an increase in manufacturing of drugs in our district? And in terms of young Māori men, has there been an increase that you've seen in the district as well, being drawn to the gang life?
Yeah, the drug question, I think we see more and are aware of more than we've ever been. I think the drug of choice has changed. Cannabis, cocaine, heroin were drugs of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. It is very much methamphetamine and MDMA, I always say it wrong, ecstasy-based tablets. Canterbury leads the country in the use of ecstasy. When we test water supplies and see what's going on, our ecstasy amounts and we test here is extremely high compared to the rest of the country, and it's only just followed by methamphetamine. So manufacture of it, a lot of it's being brought into the country, and it's very uncommon for us to catch someone manufacturing these days. They got very, very clever at it, and the precursor. The organised crime world doesn't choose a drug if it's not popular and it's not worth money. So methamphetamine's prices, it's like a trading stock market. It is going up and down where supply and demand goes. And strange enough, demand for it is in middle class New Zealand. So lawyers, teachers, accountants are more involved in the meth trade than use, I should say, than lower economic groups that we constantly talk about. And students are highly engaged in the ecstasy world. So those are two things that sound bad and evil, but the belief that MMDA, I can't say that thing ever right. The ecstasy is not a problem. It is. It's a health problem. And methamphetamine, I also believe, is a major health problem. So those are things. The Maori youth, the largest proportion of Maori in Selwyn is in the army camp, in that environment. So we see some of their kids, but not many. And there is a greater involvement of Maori youth as their families move out here from the city. So our dynamics are changing. We don't see youth gangs, Maori youth gangs, which is a great thing. I think our engagement so far with our youth in Selwyn is something you can be really proud of. They're pretty engaging with us. As the population increases, the challenge will be to keep that going and to resist the young feeder gangs that do bring people in. So your Black Power Mongrel mob love to attract young Maori boys with a carrot, and the carrot often is you get a job working in an apprenticeship for $500 a week, where you can sell methamphetamine and other drugs for $1,000 a day. So how do you compete in an employment world like that? So those are some of the challenges. At the moment, we're not seeing that organised or groups of Maori youth that other places have, and I hope that will remain that way, and it's something to be proud of at the moment.
Kia ora, thank you very much for coming today, sir. I just wanted to say thank you very much to you and the staff who've been participating in the Family Harm Working Group and the Safer Families Group and the Selwyn Wellbeing Forum. It's 51% of time spent on family harm is a lot more than I think most people are willing to realise is going on behind closed doors. It can't be pleasant to be dealing with that, but thank you very much for the work you guys put in and making people aware, and hopefully we can reduce that percentage soon. Thanks.
Yeah, look, family harm, it's going up in numbers that are being reported to us. It's soaring, and that's a good thing. Those who work in that industry, if we are creating an environment where people feel safe to report something that's personal or something going on in their house, particularly middle class, and if we're using a class system, different groups that wouldn't normally, then that's something to celebrate, that we're actually hearing what it's really going on. And in saying that we're 50% of our time, we think about 20% of family harm is all we hear about. There's a whole lot of unreported family harm. So it sounds silly, but the more reporting we get, the better, and we'll be able to actually see what the real picture is. So thank you for that.
Hi, thank you for coming in this afternoon. Yes, my question is, what can we or should we as a community be doing to support you in your role? Do you want as we see our community, do you want the reports of what maybe seem to be relatively petty crime, the car break-ins, the vandalism and stuff reported so that you get a true picture of what's going on? Is that what the sort of thing you want our community to continue doing?
Very much so. There's often a feedback, and again in social media, that police don't care about this or don't care about that. The truth is we do care about it. It's not necessarily we're able to do a lot about everything that we'd like to. But if we don't know about a crime or we don't know about an event, we can't draw a picture about what a trend may be or what is actually happening in our communities or what parts of our communities are under stress and pressure. So there are many ways of doing that. The 105 number that we've created is a really good way of getting that information to us. And it's just a wee punt for a system that seems to have got a wee bit forgotten called Crime Stoppers. It's an 0800 number. You can leave your information there. We collate, look at that and learn from that all the time. But just our expectation that we can deal with everything. Unfortunately, we'll never meet that, but we certainly do want to know about it so that our picture is complete. Our intelligence picture is really important to us, and we don't make many decisions about resourcing or where people go without looking at our evidence-based process, which relies on people telling us what's going on. If we have a discussion about resourcing and where more staff should go and people aren't reporting crime in Selwyn, it doesn't help me out terribly much when we go down that path. It's we should acknowledge what the true picture of crime is in our communities and get it all reported. Theft ex cars, for instance, that's about 12% of that gets reported to us compared to what really happens. So, and the real picture is what we need, Mark. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter, for answering those questions and for the reports that you've given us today. And yeah, have a good afternoon. We look forward to continuing the partnership that we've got and hearing from you next time.
Just remember your mayor is taking part in the show Chicago on the opening and closing night, so make sure you're there on those
And if
nights.
you can't make opening or closing nights, check out Peter Cooper starring midweek.
I had a feeling that might backfire, but it was worth a go. Thank you very much.
Councillor's got the minutes from the 24th of February. That made confirmation, moved Deputy Mayor, seconded Ipaha.
There was
Any discussion?
I sent through a correction. There was just, it failed to update that you were representing us for the subcommittee and that there was a matter of arising or under investigation that should have been carried forward from those minutes.
Right, they've been carried over. Teresa's got that now. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. First report is my report on there. There's a number of meetings that have been attended. I'll just say on top of that, just an update from meetings that myself and David viewed on Friday. Rural and Provincial was held via Zoom due to the lockdown. There'll be a fuller report shared, but to say that the changes around water and the government's focus on water now includes not only drinking water and wastewater, but also stormwater and land drainage. Minister Mahuta was pretty clear that those were firmly back in the realm of this reform space. And the discussion that looked at the changes to the Resource Management Act and the scale of those changes. There's currently a lot of uncertainty in the sector from both elected officials and staff that work on all of our councils around what does the future look like in Three Waters space. And the comment was also made that if we thought that Three Waters was a big fish to handle, that Resource Management Act changes were going to be at least 10 times that size and impact for councils. So we are doing the best we can with the limited information that we've got in the Three Waters space. We're looking forward to the 23rd of March. We are, hopefully we'll all be attending and staff are coming as well, and members from Taumotu Runanga will also be joining us, and a presentation from DIA about the state of Three Waters and where the government's current thinking is at. Following that, we're working on a cross-regional meeting so that across the South Island we'll be able to discuss from all councils' perspectives where they see things, what work is currently being done, understanding what different regions are up to, and kind of get that collective thinking going. And the government's current timeframes mean that they want to see a decision made by us about whether we stick with their proposal or opt out of their proposal by the end of the year. I think the trickiest part at the moment is that it may look like what the government wants and what Canterbury wants and what Selwyn wants. they could look quite similar from the outside, but it's actually the mechanics of the inside of an organisation and the governance models and the decision making, the sense of rangatiratanga, the ownership that Ngāi Tahu may want, and all those other little nuances within the organisation that are actually going to be where a decision hinges, I think, a lot more than some of the discussion at the moment is just around where a line on a map gets drawn, and we've got to go a lot deeper with that. The RFI process that we entered into voluntarily has not yet been complete, and so the information that we'll receive on the 20th as a DIA hasn't been able to complete that. The information that we get back on the 23rd is not going to give us the full picture because they have not been able to do that work yet. So it certainly feels like we're still walking in a little bit of fog, but each week that goes past, more information comes to light. And the Canterbury Mayoral Forum has got a piece of work that PwC has been engaged to do that will provide information back to Canterbury Council so we can make the best informed decision that we can on that. And one of the final working group meetings is on Friday this week, and subsequent to that we'll have a position to be able to, well, some positions to be able to think about and talk about as a council ourselves as to where we might go post the 23rd. David, did you have anything you wanted to add on that space?
No, you've covered the key points, I think, with respect to the analysis of the information. The 67 councils provided in response to RFI requests over 14,000 line items of information. So thus the reason that it's taken time to analyse those. Central government has advised that its preferred model will be announced in May of this year, and more importantly, we as a sector will be consulting with our respective communities during the fourth quarter of the current year.
I think probably one of the most disturbing things, as I could tell from questions that were asked during the meeting, is that many councils still don't understand that the effects of this is not just on the council supplies, but is on every community supply, and is on every supply that gives water to private residences, more than one, across their districts. And the costs for this currently are angled straight back towards councils. And so the water reforms bill and the Three Waters reform, two separate pieces of work, but have massive implications for us. So I'm grateful for the work that we've been able to do, but we're also, we're only seen as strong as our lowest common denominator within the sector, and unfortunately not every council is up with the play around the effects of this. So LGNZ is working to make sure that everyone is upskilled to the point where we can make good decisions. Councillor Alexander and Councillor Sophie.
On a lighter note, I was just wondering when we might see the video of you with respect to the Southern Motorway.
Have I made one? Oh yes, I'm making one. Yes, that was made. I just talked about I don't know when it's released. It's an NZTA video, and it's about the benefits of the Southern Motorway to our district, working in collaboration with NZTA, and the benefits of the Greater Christchurch Partnership, giving confidence from the government to invest money in our region. So that were the points touched on. It wasn't a major acting role, it was just sitting in my office. Sorry, Mark. Councillor McInnes.
Just a quick one, I hope. It was just asking if were there any particular insights from the Mayoral Forum tour of transport hubs and that sort of thing?
Yes, and I have got something that I want to give you that's written. The major points were that the first visit was to the Christchurch Airport. A lot of the discussion around the South Island was that pre-COVID was that we had too many visitors coming from overseas. We're causing too much of an impost on our infrastructure, whether that was roads or toilets, and we needed less visitors providing us more money, higher value, not more volume in tourism. And so we arrive at the airport, and that's kind of, in the back of your head. And then you find out that 85% of all freight that leaves the South Island on air was on passenger aircraft. And the passengers on that aircraft were paying for that aircraft. And so subsidising all of the air freight that leaves our country. The first 2 weeks of COVID, there was zero air freight out of the South Island. And at the moment, we're about 5% of where we were of planes coming in and landing in Christchurch. Prices have gone through the roof for air freight. So for anyone that was in that business already, there's massive constraints on being able to get anything to export quickly. And on top of that, and an example was given of a West Coast exporter who had previously been selling container loads of their product to shops overseas. And because of COVID, had decided to repackage everything into boxes sold to homes. It was faster to send it and they could sell more. But there's just a whole other product line now that needs to find its way onto an aeroplane. And so the discussion for Terrace Airport, the conversations around Queenstown, and the things for Christchurch Airport are all connected to freight. And the conversation publicly has been about people, but it's a freight, it's an export, it's a New Zealand's productivity that's on the line. And even one of the conversations was, one of the presentations talked about flights into Christchurch during the middle of winter. And so we only get freight out. The best freight out is on planes that have got 2 aisles, wide body carriers, 2 aisles inside the plane. And we get flights in from Melbourne into Christchurch, but in the middle of winter, lots of people from Australia want to go to Queenstown. But Melbourne doesn't have any extra capacity to add a new flight to Queenstown for those 3 months during winter. So they take the flight off Christchurch and send it to Queenstown, because that's where the people want to go. And when it's only people you're worried about, that's fine. But when it's freight that you're trying to export on the plane on the way back, or import on the way in, the system isn't talking to each other in the way that it should. So that was probably the big takeaway from the airport. We then went to the Lyttelton Port Company. 15% of their trade is now coming in by rail, which is great. But 15% is still a really small number. We talked about the land reclamation that they have there, and also some of the and the new cruise berth that they've invested a lot in, and will be good once boats are allowed back in. The key concerns from the port, and we went to Timaru Port as well, the key concerns from the port were basically that people are not working together enough, and that sea freight is controlled in an international market environment, and that it's basically free to send as many containers as you want to China, but very expensive to get them from Auckland to Christchurch, or from Christchurch to Auckland. So when containers are the things that you need on a ship to move things around, and the easiest and freest and cheapest thing to do is to get them back offshore to the place that they can be filled up again to bring goods back, it doesn't make for good trade around our place, around New Zealand. And if we were to try and set up a shipping line of New Zealand's, wherever that would sit or be owned, the comments back were, as soon as you started to staff that at New Zealand wages, it would be uneconomic. And so you end up in this ethical discussion around, we've got a whole system of freight that's reliant on unethical practices in New Zealand context, but supports a worldwide industry of which we don't have control over. And so yeah, it was gnarly, I suppose, that piece. There's no easy solution there. And I think the mayors at the end, and then the next meeting we'll have some feedback on it. We had a little bit of a discussion, but it just sort of showed there's a broken down nature to individual entities having shareholders who have their own interests at heart, rather than a New Zealand Inc. or a Canterbury Inc. Place for what they were trying to do. And so when we're talking about Auckland Airport owning some of Queenstown Airport and Christchurch moving into Terrace, and then we're thinking about Timaru and Tauranga Port owning parts of there, and Christchurch City Council owning bits of Lyttelton Port Company, and everyone wanting a return. It's a complex thing to try and enter into, but certainly learned a lot. And the Regional Transport Committee will now be taking over the piece of work. I kicked it off on the mayoral forum, but the Regional Transport Committee now will take that on. And Kiwi Rail was the one missing piece, because it came the day after we left level 2, and Kiwi Rail wasn't able to confirm that they were able to go ahead under those conditions. So Kiwi Rail was still to happen, and there's a key missing link of infrastructure that came up during the day, which is in Rolleston, and it's the link from the Midland line heading south. And having even just that wee curve would make a big difference to containers being able to choose which port do I go to, which one makes sense, rather than how do I move north and then have to figure out shunting south and changing things around. So yeah, we were left with a lot more questions and answers, but they were really, really good questions. Grant.
Well, you just finished on what I was hoping to ask, is what was the reflection on Rolleston? I mean, our view has been that Rolleston should be the natural logistics hub for the wider Canterbury area, with the north, south and west railway lines and the industrial estates. Was that widespread view held by other members on that tour?
Yeah, we met with the CEO of Sorted Logistics and also of Temuka Transport, and both of their reflections were that to the room, if you want to do something, do what Selwyn's done, and have the ability to get on and off rail as easily as you can. Their advice was actually that we needed more Rolleston type spaces spread across Canterbury rather than just locating them all in one space. So yeah, they were very complimentary of what's been done here, and even of Synlait putting in the current rail line just makes sense. There was talks about how in the logging industry, how that could happen when you know you've got a forest that's going to be there and milled multiple times and putting in rail. But uncertainty basically kills off lots of arguments around how you might do more in rail. But there was complimentary of the Rolleston space grant, yes. I'm happy to move to receive my report. Seconder, Malcolm. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. We move on to the District Licensing Committee, page 15. And Billy Childen, welcome to the front of the room. There's two reports, one from December and one from January. Grant, happy to move both as a seconder. Lemon. Billy, I'll hand to you. Is there any highlights you'd like to pull out and tell us about?
Yes, I suppose from the new festival that was held at Larkham's Vineyard in February from January created a lot of work with 15 special licenses. That event was well received and well patronised, and they're looking to extend it for next year. I don't think there's any other issues around safety with that particular event. The other event that's highlighted in the January report was the Lincoln University all-week Wednesday evening event. That sold really well with 700 plus students going to it. It was run very well, and the alcohol licensing inspector was very pleased with it. The only issue we had was a lot of noise complaints, but we've dealt with that with the university.
Thanks, Billy. Just a question on the special consents you're talking about, 15 given. Have we worked with the organisers to try and think about how one might be able to do everything, or is it just so nuanced that it just seems like there's a lot of duplication for one event?
There is. It takes a lot of work too, but the applicant wanted each individual stall owner to own their responsibilities, right. Hence the multiple special licenses. And we have talked about doing that globally with them to reduce the cost for all of the event participants, and also the amount of work it creates. We're still talking about that with them, and hopefully we might get a success.
Cool, thank you. Any further questions? Grant?
Not a question, a statement, probably just around Lincoln. I had a Lincoln Community Committee meeting, and I suppose it's a hardy annual week, but there was a degree of realism from the local community that, hey, these are kids, this is once a year, let's suck it up and let them enjoy themselves. So I guess we need to just balance the noise complaints and everything else, but they're part of our community. They should have fun once or twice a year without being hounded. So yeah, I think that was a general tone I got from the community, is that, yeah, we understand there's some noise and some yahooing, but hey, why not?
I could probably add to that there was a very good, practical, positive discussion with the university with that as part of the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. No further questions. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. The next item is an alternative hearings panel member for the bylaw for keeping of animals, poultry and bees. Moved Alexander, seconded Epeha. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Next item is private plan change 59, rezoning of land in West Melton. Rachel, welcome to the front of the room. It's on page 30 of today's agenda. Rachel.
Good afternoon, councillors. So yes, back talking to you about plan changes in West Melton. This one is plan change 59, which it covers the Willfield subdivision just on this side of State Highway 73. The request relates to rezoning the existing Living 2 and Living 2A zones to a Living West Melton zone to allow for a level of intensification. The current Willfield area has, through a number of resource consent applications, generally developed at a greater density than permitted by the current zoning, which has resulted in a number of large balance lots awaiting further development. The increased density sought in the plan change basically is for the undeveloped areas, generally similar to the density of development that has already occurred. So we're not talking about people who have purchased their 1,500 square metre sections and they're now going to be able to subdivide. It's more about the rules reflecting what's actually on the ground now. An independent planning commissioner, Mr. Ken Lawn, was appointed to consider the plan change and to make a recommendation to yourselves on the plan change and the submissions received. For the reasons set out in his recommendation, the Commissioner recommends that Plan Change 59 be approved, subject to a few modifications set out in his recommendation, and the matters raised in submissions are accepted in part or rejected. It is my recommendation that Council accepts the Commissioner's recommendation and approve Plan Change 59, subject to the modifications set out in his report. If you accept his recommendation and approve Plan Change 59, then 59 will continue along the statutory RMA process, with the decision being publicly advertised and notice being served on all submitters. A 30-day appeal period is provided to lodge an appeal against the decision to the Environment Court. If no appeal is received within this timeframe, then PC 59 will be deemed to be operative and the district plan amended accordingly. In terms of the proposed plan, the area of the plan change request has been zoned a combination of general residential and large lot residential. The boundary between the proposed zones is inconsistent with the requested plan change. However, the plan change proponent has made a submission to have the plan change area rezoned to reflect a zoning pattern more consistent with the plan change. So by the time we're out the other end, it should basically match. Any questions?
Thanks, Rachel, for that. Questions around the room?
Sam,
Councillor Alexander?
I don't have so much of a question as I'm happy to move this recommendation. I'm very pleased to note that a 224 certificate won't be issued until the new traffic lights are installed and operative at West Melton. So I think this reflects part of what the concern in the community was about continued growth in the Wilfield area, was the difficulty that provided with traffic getting through that intersection, both to the West Melton Township proper, as well as getting off and on the state highway. So I think it's a very appropriate condition to be added to the consent, to the plan change, that they can't effectively develop until those lights are operative. So on that basis, I'm more than happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconder? Mugford? Sorry, Sophie and Grant. I didn't see who was next. Grant.
Page 43. Following along from Mark's comments, I just think we've missed a wonderful opportunity to have a much better development with the removal of the undercycle pedestrian underpass, which was a condition previously, and replacing it with the traffic lights. I just fail to see, that's a high volume, extremely busy road, likely to get busier. And so this could have been developer-led and actually had a really good solution, a long-term solution. And if there's an opportunity to revisit that, I would suggest we should, because it just seems to me this is going to be an ongoing future. Can you imagine that State Highway 73, it's not going to get any less traffic. And so a condition of a 224 for traffic lights, it doesn't cut the mustard. I think we've sold ourselves short and our community short.
Thanks, Grant. Rachel, do you have any, did the Commissioner mention more than what you've told us here about that particular condition?
The underground underpass under the state highway was never going to work. We don't have the angle of it, given the existing patterns of land ownership and where the Gainsborough, it is Gainsborough on the north side, isn't it? Side of it would mean that you would need a kink in the underpass, which then creates all sorts of safety issues in terms of places for people to hide and then do dastardly things. The at-grade crossing, the surface crossing, there were a number of them done as part of the earlier developments, but basically the opportunity for an underpass there was probably about 15 years ago. It's not something we can, unfortunately, it's not something we can go back and retrofit now.
I guess fundamentally I don't agree with that answer. It's an engineering solution that can be done.
That's right.
Can
Sophie?
I make a comment on it? It is an issue with underpasses, full stop, and they are inherently quite unsafe unless there is a proper way that can be seen through them. And they're really more of a last resort now when you're taking into account of crime prevention through environmental design. By having the lights and with everyone crossing above the ground, then the people, although Grant, as you've raised, is a good point, talking about the traffic lights and the traffic will get heavier, at least the people that are crossing are safe visually from anything else that might be happening under the ground, which the traffic on the road won't be able to see. And goodness knows how many other people are actually can see through it. It's actually needs to be in an area where there's a lot of people around really who can be watching out for others.
Mr. Gold, Sophie?
Kia ora. Thanks for coming, Rachel. I guess as far as my only comment with the underground cycleways, the developer's probably very happy to not have to pay for that. But my main comment was going to be, there's a lot of mention around in the wording about how the size of the sections is large enough that they don't need to put as much green space in there. And I guess I can't really, I mean, that's obviously the Commissioner's view and what some of the submissions put in there, but I just wanted to comment that that's kind of sad in a way, because green space is where you build your community. And obviously when you're in lockdown, you know, you go for a walk through the park, not around your back garden 3 times, or, you know, it sounds a bit dumb, but it's kind of sad if they're trying to also save a bit of money by removing green space.
It's not that they were attempting to remove green space. That comment from the Commissioner was in response to submissions asking for a lot of green space in excess of what would be consistent for Council's policy around green space at subdivision. Yeah, so they're still proposing green space in accordance with council policy. They're just not proposing more than that, which would then long-term result in a burden on council in terms of maintenance and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Any further questions or comments? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carries. Thank you for that, Rachel. Next, Jocelyn. Plan change 73. It's on pages 62 of today's report. That's
Good afternoon, thank you. Plan change 73 relates to 2 parcels of land on the western side of Rolleston. They're formerly plantation forestry blocks owned by the Selwyn Plantation Board and commonly referred to as the Holmes Block and the Scatterup Block. Together they comprise around 160 hectares, and I'll refer to them as the site for the most part. It has frontage to Duns Crossing Road, and also the Holmes Block has frontage to Burnham School Road, and adjoins the State Highway. To the east, West Rolleston Primary School, childcare centre and a variety of smaller residential properties, and an intensive farming activity being poultry sheds. That sits between the 2 blocks. The balance of the land is around to the south and west is zoned rural outer plains, and the site itself is used for cropping and pastoral grazing, and there's a couple of centre pivots on each of the blocks. Much of the land to the south and west is designated by council for uses associated with the Pines Wastewater Treatment Plant and the Pines Resource Recovery Park. And both of these facilities have been identified as strategic infrastructure to the council and acknowledged as such in the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement. Currently, both blocks, the site is zoned Living 3, that occurred via plan change back in 2011. And the provisions of the district plan currently provide for sites between 4,000 square metres and 4 hectares. And there are limits on the number of sites per each of the blocks. 97 lots in relation to the Homes block and 51 in relation to the Scaller-up block. The Plan Change 73 seeks to change that zoning from the operative Living 3 to Living Z. There's a small area of Business 1 on each of the blocks. The Living Z zone provides for densities ranging in size, but with an average lot size of 650 square metres, and allows for medium density comprehensive development and medium density small lot development as well. The plan change proposes to pick up the existing provisions of the operative plan and incorporate an outline development plan for both blocks. There are some minor modifications proposed to remove reference to the existing zoning as well. The site's not identified in the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement as a Greenfield priority area, nor is it picked up by proposed change 1 to the RPS. And it's also not identified within Rolleston's infrastructure boundary at this time. However, National Policy Statement on Urban Development has opened the door to allowing, to inviting this plan change, and that's done on the basis that it provides for significant capacity. So this report, my report is a procedural requirement under the RMA. Under Clause 25, Council has a decision to make. It can either reject the plan change, accept the plan change, or adopt the plan change up for itself. Just briefly, rejecting the plan change, there are a number of criteria set out in the Resource Management Act for that, and it's my view that none of the plan change doesn't trigger any of those 5 criteria, and therefore there is not the grounds to reject the plan change outright. Second option is to adopt the plan change, in which case Council would adopt it as its own, effectively taking over the plan change request, and it becomes ours. Traditionally, Council have only considered doing that in a number of situations where there's a strategic benefit, where there's a community benefit, whether there's a cost element or there's a number of applicants, landowners, or a complex issue that needs to be resolved. In my view, none of those exist here. However, there is, rather than a strategic benefit, there is the issue of the implications that this plan change may have on our strategic infrastructure. And as such, that makes this application, this request, more complex, perhaps, than what previous plan change requests have been, private plan change requests have been, or those that are still on our books and currently to come before you. As I said, the Homes block provides for significant intensification, going from 97 lots to proposed 1,150 lots in close proximity to the Pines facility. While both the wastewater treatment plant and the resource recovery centre operate under existing consents, Council's long-term plan is to expand these facilities to support the growing population growth in the district, and Council's asset staff have expressed concern regarding the potential that reverse sensitivity effects may have from a more intensive residential development may have on the existing operations of facilities, and also on the implication for growth of those facilities, particularly in regards to potentially having to seek future consent. A lot of that is crystal ball gazing, and I acknowledge as such. The advantage of adopting the plan change on our own would mean that Council controls the process. We'd be able to modify the request to address those concerns raised by our asset staff in regards to the implications that the plan change may have on that infrastructure. However, there are 2 significant disadvantages to doing that. The first is that under the provisions of the RMA, if Council adopts the request as its own, it would have legal effect from date of notification as opposed to from date of decision. So even if we adopt it and modified it to address the concerns of assets, from the date that we notify it for community engagement, it would have effect, and that's a significant disadvantage to my mind. The reason for that is that at this stage we haven't considered the substantive merits of the application we've gone through a process to consider the adequacy of the information provided, but not the merits of the zone and this location, the intensification. We haven't done any of that, and that's a step that the next process affords us. The second disadvantage is that if we did adopt it as ourselves, then all the costs associated with continuing with this plan change request would fall onto council. At the moment, they are the responsibility of the proponent. So for those reasons, my recommendation is not to adopt the plan change request. Your fourth option is to turn it into a resource consent. The matters before you but in the plan change are way beyond the scope of the existing plan to adequately address, so I don't think that's an option. So I've resolved that, concluded that the option available is to adopt the plan change. Sorry, is to accept the plan change.
Yes, get that word right.
Accept the plan change. Accept the plan change. Which this would mean that we continue with the substantive merits the same way as we have done with every other private plan change before us. We make it available to our community through the public notification procedures. We invite submissions and respond to submissions. There's no cost beyond, no cost to our community. That's all able to be on charge to the plan change proponent. One of the issues around this plan change is the triggers within the National Policy Statement on urban development and the issue of significant capacity. And in this regard, the applicant has proposed that, or has provided information that says that the plan change would account for the equivalent of 27% of current housing stock within Rolleston, or 8% within the district. And in 2020, the proposed capacity of the plan change as presented at the moment would be around 21% of predicted dwellings in Rolleston and 7% across the district. So it certainly does provide for development capacity and meets the trigger under the NPSUD. That's also an element that would be more substantially tested through accepting the plan change and continuing with the notification procedures. So in conclusion, I don't believe that there's significant grounds to reject the plan change. I see that there are significant disadvantages in adopting the plan change as our own, and noting at this stage that there's no substantive assessment that's been done. It's a very coarse scale assessment of the contents of the plan change. My recommendation is that council accept it and continue with the RMA process for notification.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Mark.
Yeah, again, I'm happy to move the recommendation to accept the plan change. I do have two questions for Jocelyn. The first of which is, do we, as a council, draw this to the Ministry of Education's attention? With 2,000 lots approximately, history would show for Rolleston that's going to generate approximately 2,000 school-aged children, which is 2 to 3 more primary schools, and not just increasing the cap on West Rolleston School. You can't jam 2,000 more children into West Rolleston School in any conceivable fashion. So do we specifically draw this to the Ministry's attention, and perhaps so that the developer and the Ministry can work together to provide school sites within this scale of development? My second question is the staff response. As you've said, there are issues with our nearby facilities. Would that be addressed in either the officer's report or by a direct submission by council on the plan change?
Thank you. In relation to MFE, Ministry of Education, the current practice is to notify both the ministry and the board of a plan change if it's impacting as they are directly as a neighbour. But I understand one of my colleagues has had recent conversations with the ministry specifically around growth in Rolleston and what the implications of the plan changes would be. That was as of late last week. So yes, they will be notified specifically of this because they adjoin the boundary. In terms of staff responses, the process that would follow if council accepts the plan change, the culmination of public notification submissions and further submissions is the writing of a report, a Section 42A report, which looks at the merits of the application. And certainly I can foresee a large component of that report will be consideration of the issues that have been raised by our assets department. Traditionally, it's looked at as their capacity in the network to accommodate, and so we regularly engage with Murray England and Andrew Maisie to contribute towards plan change. The evidence that we write. Certainly, Andrew Boyd has also had a big involvement in discussions to this point. So I don't see that process will change, and yes, they will have a significant component going forward.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? A seconder for the motion? Councillor Lyle? No further questions? Oh, Deborah.
With regards to this plan change, can we agree to accept in part, or do we have to accept the whole?
You can accept in part. It's an option. My hesitation on that is that we haven't considered the parts of it. Can I ask how you mean accept in part?
Well, we've got an outline development plan for 2 lots, the homes and the Skellerup block, right? And accepting in part, do we have to accept both those blocks, or could we accept one block over another block?
You can. Your options are to accept in part or in whole. So it is an option. It's not one that I've explored. I considered the idea of adopting rather than accepting in part.
Deborah, maybe if you just lay out why you think it should be adopted in part, because otherwise we've got a movement and a seconder to move forward with accepting it, and then the process can deal with the matters that have obviously been raised and sit before us currently.
The reason why I'm asking that was reading the report, I understand that there was no consultation undertaken with Selwyn District Council, which means that there would be, up until the submission of the private plan change request, there's Selwyn District Council, apart from the legal process of the RMA with the planning department, there's been no other consultation with our staff. Would that be my understanding from assets and how I'm reading the consultation part of this report? That's correct. So basically, but there is, I guess, case law around consultation. You can decide to have consultation with parties, or you can decide not to consult, and those issues will turn up at the appropriate stage. And I guess I'm asking, when is the appropriate stage? At the subdivision stage or at the private plan change request stage, in regards to law around consultation?
Just want to answer or ask a question of those who have screens. Does clause 25(2) actually provide to accept in part?
Can I just make a comment on that?
Yeah, sure, Tim.
It does, but the same reasons that you would reject a plan change must apply to that part that you're not accepting, if you see what I mean. So there's 5 criteria for rejecting a plan change. So if you weren't accepting all of the plan change, that part you were rejecting would have to meet one of those criteria. And I don't believe that any of them do, as the threshold's fairly high in terms of sound resource management. So it's already been stated that in the planner's view, there's no criteria that it meets the whole. I don't think you can break it down to parts. So any of those one parts would not meet the criteria set out in the first schedule. So for the same reasons that you're recommending that you can't reject it, I think that applies to rejecting part of it, if you see what I mean.
Okay. So I think councillors, we're well aware of the land constraint issues we currently have in Rolleston. To unduly delay a proper assessment of the application is not warranted in staff's opinion, and has come to us to tell us that there's no reason to reject or delay this any further, and that through the next process the merits of the application will be will be looked at thoroughly, and there'll be the opportunity for all the effects that Mark asked about and the community facilities that we have responsibility for to be included in the assessment at that stage. So I'm going to, Malcolm,
I was just going to confirm the reason why I seconded this was because I believe that this puts us in the right place to go through the proper processes to have a hearing. Trying to split it up could be seen as vexatious, and I do believe that it's delaying the inevitable and won't get us where we need to go. This needs to go to the public, and that's what's going to happen.
so we've got a mover and seconder. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carries. Thanks, Jocelyn. Next item is item number 14. It's on page 80, Ellesmere Wastewater Treatment Plant Issues and Options Update. Murray and Alex.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. As Sam mentioned, we are turning to page 80 is where the start of the report commences. If we turn over one page, we'll just run you through the report and then take questions at the end. So just as an overview, this is looking at the capacity into the future for the Ellesmere Wastewater Treatment Plant. The Ellesmere Treatment Plant services communities of Leaston and Dawston and Southbridge. Ultimately, by the end of this 10-year period, we're looking at, in 2031, we're looking at 4,401 people, which I thought was quite interesting. With that accurate to one person, it shows that every one person counts. The plant currently consists of a number of oxidation ponds, a pond system, irrigates to land, and there's also a rapid infiltration basin discharge of the effluent there.
So the plant was designed for 3,600 people, and we know that there are about 3,900 residents living in the catchment area now. We also know that the plant is experiencing regularly high nitrogen in the effluent and high hydraulic loads through the plant, both of which suggest that the plant is at or over its capacity right now. So if council decide to keep the treatment plant, it would need to be upgraded. And this isn't something new. This is something we have known about for a while. We budgeted for it in the last long-term plan and again in this long-term plan.
Perfect. Moving down to the third section there, the wastewater treatment plant currently has a non-compliance condition, which we didn't dispute. It's a technical non-compliance and it relates to condition 7. Condition 7 talks about the nitrogen loading of our discharge. And basically, the way the Environment Canterbury interpreting this condition is that we need a net zero discharge. So whatever we put on the ground, we need to take away in terms of cut and carry. So we've done a lot of work with low environmental, and we believe we've proven that that's actually impossible to achieve for a wastewater treatment plant system, and even for a farming system that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. So we are in ongoing discussions with Environment Canterbury with that, but that, including all the growth, there are some limitations to our disposal field in Ellesmere. I think that is probably all I want to say about that. Just to say that we have also done the counterfactual. If we were to graze that land, instead of doing the cut and carry, would be around about 80 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen per year, which is obviously way greater than zero. So we feel we're in a reasonably strong position on that argument.
So low environmentals assessment also showed us that the plant has quite high groundwater in winter, which is no surprise, which means that the irrigation fields do struggle to cope with the hydraulic loading of wastewater being applied, leading to ponding. Aqualink, in our climate change assessment of the district, found that Ellesmere Wastewater Treatment Plant is expected to not be able to discharge to land because of that high groundwater for 4 to 5 days at a time, roughly every year, but for up to 12 days at a time per year. So this just reinforces the need for extended storage at the plant if we do decide to keep it in operation. The site's also subject to periodic flooding, as you can see over the page in figures 1 and 2. So both of these factors, combined with the population growth in the catchment, mean that the plant will become less resilient with time.
So we looked at a couple of options to resolve this matter. The first is to pump partially treated wastewater to the Pines treatment plant to be treated. And the second option was to upgrade the Ellesmere Wastewater Treatment Plant, addressing the issues that we've just mentioned. The third option is to pipe the wastewater to Pines. This will be partially treated wastewater run through the ponds before pumping. The pipeline will be around about 21 kilometres long, and in the future it would open up options for the council to consider connecting Upper Sound huts and a number of the camping grounds along the Sound River at the same time. That's for future discussion. There's a diagram on that same page, figure 3, looking at the route that we could be taking. We also looked at the option of pumping raw water through that line, but there are some issues and limitations that require a larger pipe and some hydraulic considerations. So the treated effluent is the way we are looking at going.
So as an alternative, if we do keep the Ellesmere plant, we'll need to upgrade it. Becca have done this work for us, and they found that we would need to convert the treatment plant to an activated sludge process, that in order to reduce the nitrogen content in the wastewater. We'd need to buy more land, 22 hectares more for irrigation, and we'd need to build that winter buffer storage of about 50,000 cubic meters, or 3 months of inflow in the winter. So as you can see in the figure below, figure 4, these upgrades could be just to most of the extent accommodated within the existing ponds, but there's a significant price tag for that, which Maria will talk to you in the following section.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to jump over section 5 pretty quickly. As I said, we've done a review of our resource consents, and there's a number that we can surrender, which we'll be doing so in the near future. So finally, we'll end on section 9, which is the funding implications. We did some work with PwC, developing our financial models for this project. And on page 88, table 2, we talk about the two options, piping to Pines on the left and the upgrade on the right. In all situations, in terms of the cost of the ratepayers, development contributions to the developers, and the totals are cheaper for the option of piping to the Pines. So that's the council staff's preferred option, and the one that we are consulting on and part of the LTP coming up. So that is our report in summary. We're happy to take questions.
Thank you. And just to note, this is a matter for consultation through the long-term plan. So today's really receiving of a report, not a decision-making session. Councillor Lemon.
Yeah, thanks, guys. A lot of work gone into this, quite obvious. It's a major part of our agenda item today. So enthralling reading, Murray, as it always is. No, but seriously, it is a very important topic for us. From an Ellesmere perspective, it's a problem we've known we've had for some period of time, and an issue that needs solving. So pragmatic solutions being offered. I guess, and we've had this discussion around the table before, I guess the real concern is that net zero figure. And is that going to be an ongoing expectation? It seems extraordinarily high bar to set. You know, we have farm environment plans that for people in the agricultural industry, well, no one's suggesting a net zero. I mean, it just seems an extraordinary high bar to try and set, an unachievable bar, as you've said. I guess the real concern there is, even if you bought another 22 hectares and retained it there, you're still not going to achieve a net zero because it's not achievable. So it's really putting, you know, if that's the bar that's being set, it's putting it as a no-brainer to choose a solution regardless of the other outcomes. But then raises the issue of, are we going to be, then when we go to a new consent here at Pines, is that going to be the new bar? And if it is the new bar, how does anyone meet that? It's just going to be impossible. So that's another conversation for another time, no doubt. But really, congratulations on the work, and I think a pragmatic outcome to go out to consultation on. So well done. I'm happy to move it as a report. Yeah.
Grant Miller, seconded. Thank you very much for the report. Again, yes, agree with the comments that Councillor Lemon has made. I'd just like to commend you on your recommendation for the council to consult with the Runanga. Excellent. Good to see that in there. I'll be interested to see the outcome of that and what that actually looks like. Thank you.
I think it was Sophie.
Sorry. Hopefully a quick question. On your on figure 3, there's the purple line indicating where an extra pipeline could go to Coesford and Upper Selwyn huts. Is that part of this intended consultation, or is that separate calculations?
Yeah, so that will be separate. We mentioned the consultation document, that's something we're looking at, but it's that will be separate.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for raising that, Sophie, because I think it's minor within the report, but it's actually a major outcome for us, and having wastewater being treated in our riverbeds as they currently stand, and the issues down at Selwyn huts being blurred between wastewater solutions and climate change. There's an outcome here that can help clarify all of that, which will be good for us going forward. Moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Declare it carried. Thanks, Alex. Murray. Next item, selecting the appropriate level of asset management, policy review and updates. Murray Washington.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. Probably not the most exciting topic on the agenda today. So I'll just have some opening comments. Very much procedural, this report, driven to some degree because our last review was in 2017 and the audit as going for the long-term plan. We're quite keen to see that we had a more current policy. So that is what we are actually providing today. Although through this, we're actually recommending through that we continue with the same base level of activity measurement planning that we had in 2017. Though I will note that particularly in transportation through the work of NGTA, the 5 waters work that we're always improving, and through with community facilities, we're actually exceeding those baselines anyway. So what we thought we'd take the opportunity this time is to actually, rather than have it all as a report, is to put it together into a draft policy so that can go into the policy manual. And the only other comment I make is that even though that is going into a draft policy, it's a bit longer than we would like to desire to have a policy. And so the next review would be looking at streamlining that.
A question, on page 306, where it's talking about the analysis of transportation and 5 waters should be more sophisticated and transition nearer to advanced. We've kept them at intermediate. Can you've kind of touched on that, but I'd like a slightly better explanation so I can understand. Because my view would be if it's to put them at advanced rather than intermediate. So I just need to understand.
It's about how much resource you have to put into this and the benefit of putting more resource in to try to reach the nirvana of advanced. We could get there, but practically on the ground and what it does in terms of our council budgets and long-term plan, it probably wouldn't have a major impact, but it would create quite a resourcing issue.
Okay, thank you. That perhaps wasn't quite as clear in the report as it could have been, that the benefit.
It's always probably the desire of asset managers to get to advanced at some point in the journey, but it's not necessarily a benefit optimal outcome.
You've struck on the very subject I wanted to address, and usually these things are your eyes glaze over, but this is with our 3 waters reform, this is a fundamental aspect which they're bringing up about saying councils are under-investing, under-assessing asset management, and saying it's a cost factor. My interpretation and my memory, and sorry if I'm wrong, but this was brought up by our auditors, I think over 3 years ago, that we should be moving from intermediate to advanced. And so here we are 3 years later saying, let's do the status quo. The reason is cost, and we haven't developed our internal processes. Well, that's a cop-out, isn't it? Isn't it we had a 3-year window, and so it just perpetuates what national government is telling us about lack of investment in core infrastructure and actually understanding what our risks are. And I feel quite disappointed to see this report because it just says the status quo has prevailed and we haven't done much. And I think if you go to page 317 particularly, I'll go there myself, so I've got it highlighted. Legislative requirements meets minimum requirements. Selwyn District Council policy is to meet the minimum requirement. So is that our policy? We want to do the bare minimum, and where possible we might do some more. I think that policy might have been there in the past, but I certainly don't see it being there in the future. If you go to page 319 and you look down to solid waste factor assessments, risks associated with failures? Low. Surely an environmental failure of our wastewater is a high risk. So you're sort of calling into question, is this report as effective as we want it to be? And that's where I'm at. And so while it might be a bland policy review, the actual effectiveness of this policy is critical to our organisation.
Yeah, hear your comments, Grant, and I guess it's the vexed issue of what do you do in Three Waters space at the moment, knowing the conversation that's going on, the level of investment conversation, which I don't necessarily agree with. That we've underinvested. I think we invest very wisely, and we subject our proposed investments through our annual plans or our LTPs and subject those to the affordability debate every year. Absolutely correct, though, that this is the minimum. And I think what we're trying to do is to adopt that status, acknowledging A, what is in front of us, and B, as Murray talked about with the policy, that all of our policies are subject to a pretty rigorous review process. And the next step is, once we've got through the Three Waters, understanding how does that impact on these assets that are identified.
Am I correct in my remembrance, this is from 3 years ago with the auditor's report, that they asked us to upgrade our systems and to get to advanced?
I can't categorically say yes or no because I can't recall, Grant.
Grant's raised a really important question there. If that was a recommendation, I'm wondering whether we let this lay on the table, and I think we need to know the answer to that, to be fair. There's no urgency to pass it at this meeting. I think we lay it on the table until we've got the answer to that question.
Yeah,
so it's actually an important core question.
There's no urgency, it is just procedural. So if that is the wish of the meeting, then we could just leave it and undertake that investigation. And more specifically, look at the wording, A, of 3 years ago, but B, and more importantly, is it still a follow-up item? Because if it's not a follow-up item, then in the eyes of the auditors, it must have been attended to.
Well, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't really matter whether it's it matters if it's a follow-up item, but it's either important to us or it's not. And so we've said, I think we're hearing now it's important. And so regardless of what the auditors have previously said, we may want to change what's here. I just wonder with the timing of what has been requested now, and Murray, you've mentioned that the current audit process has suggested this needs updating from 2017, whether we pass this today, and then David, this policy is on the next round of your review of policies, so that we know that it's kind of going back before us. You do that quarterly, yeah?
Our next one is in November.
So okay, maybe it's a bit further away. Just don't want to unnecessarily delay what we have in front of us. Deborah, Murray, and then Deborah.
Yeah, sorry, just maybe a suggestion. If it's come through the review process, it would be appropriate to bring something back to audit and risk. If council are happy with that, then we could make a recommendation to bring to this council meeting. You happy with that?
Yeah. Or because we've got Ray on the table at the moment, and that's
This suggestion is from the chief executive that we pass this as it is, and then we can bring a recommendation back to discuss this in depth and get an understanding, because it would have come to audit and risk. Grant, is your recollection of that as a audit New Zealand?
I'm happy to move in the direction that the paper be redirected to audit and risk for further investigation and brought back to the wider council once approved by audit and risk.
Yes, so Lyle and Epeha have moved what's here.
Yep.
As a mover of the original motion, I think passing it today, then taking it back to audit and risk to look into the policy is the way to go. It's sensible. It keeps things moving, and we still deal with the issues within it that you've outlined.
And I would concur with that. If it is still an outstanding audit matter, then that's dealt with appropriately through that committee as well.
Mark, and then Murray.
Sam, I'm just wondering if the mover and seconder were happy that somehow in the recommendation that it be the intent to refer it to audit and risk be added. That way there is a record that we're passing it today, but if we intend it to go to review to audit and risk, that we include that as a recommendation. I'm just, if the mover and seconder are happy with that, rather than put it up as an amendment. If they're happy to include that, I think that would show the direction the meeting appears to be moving in.
Yeah, with that. Yep. Okay. So, Murray?
Yeah, I cannot recall the audit recommendations. I do know from time to time through reviews that auditors are always trying to raise the bar on everything, and we do try to take a pragmatic approach to that. I do note that the transportation 5 auditors are both set at intermediate, which is not the minimum being core. However, we are in the process of obviously reviewing activity management plans, infrastructure strategies like as part of the LTP adoption, and obviously we're only days away from having sign off for the long-term plan to go to consultation. So I would prefer the moving it so we have a current policy, and actually in reviewing it we will be able to take in cognizant of anything that the auditors tell us through their current review process. Remember, they're currently reviewing activity management plan, not what happened 3 years.
Okay, so 3's just been added to note the addition for to capture it by audit and risk and report back here. Grant?
And just to confirm that I'm happy with the process provided, but what I want to note is that what we are seeing in the wider community, not just in Selwyn, is an element of stasis where everyone is basically either putting their asset management into stationary or reverse while they wait for 3 waters reform. I think we've got to proceed under the basis that we maybe continue with this asset and continue with the levels of service that we want to provide, and not sort of hang around hoping for a decision.
All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Declare it carried. Murray, we look forward to hearing back from you. Thanks, Murray. And Murray Lemon, look forward to hearing back from you post the audit and risk review. 5 audits report, page 232, Murray and Delane.
All right, good afternoon again. So we are reading from page 323, and the item is 3.1, wastewater, Ellesmere wastewater treatment plant options, which I reported on earlier this evening, this afternoon I should say. So I won't go into that anymore. Over the page, we turn to the water services bill. Just so you know that council did make their submission at this 24th of February meeting, was approved. That's gone in, and the hearing is dated for next week, I believe. So Sam will be leading the council in that matter. Drinking water compliance.
Yeah, so just an update on our drinking water compliance status. The Horata Water Safety Plan was approved by the DHB in mid-February. It's believed to be only the 3rd water safety plan to be approved in New Zealand under, under the new framework, and that follows a huge collaborative effort by staff, the operator and consultants on that.
That is no small feat to have that approved. It's quite exciting. So we were pushing for Rolleston, but being a non-chlorinated supply, it was hard work. So we did change tact, and Horata being a chlorinated supply went through with our process. So we'll be following through all our chlorinated supplies, and then we'll tackle the non-chlorinated ones again.
Yep. We're also in the process just now of undergoing our annual chemical sampling regime. So when the results are received back from that, we'll put them directly to council and we'll put them up on the website. Yeah. Any questions on drinking water?
Do you have a time frame around those keep sampling, the testing? Because I find that I'm being approached with the recent furore over nitrates, that I'm being approached in public spaces about how safe is Rolleston's water, where are the results, and when you say they're being tested, people are saying, when will they be able to see those results? So it is actually very topical it is in people's minds. So I just wondered if you have an idea roughly, is it the end of this month, middle of next month, when we might see those results?
Probably the middle of next month, just to get the whole district results, but they are starting to trickle through. So that should start the beginning of next week that we begin to get results.
Yeah, and just say once we receive them, we won't necessarily wait till we have another council report. We can start updating our website with those new results as they come available. Yeah, and we'll let you know as councillors.
Thank you. And just on this report, come the spring, early summer, it'd be nice, it would be helpful to see commentary in this report also on our groundwater levels for our wells. as we move through the early summer, so that to give some indication of what's likely to be happening, so that if we like to move into water restrictions. Not quite so urgent now that we're seeing good rain and that we're moving into the winter period, but this report will be useful to have those commentary on the well water levels through that period.
That's good. No, we have been very fortunate this summer not to have water restrictions, but you're right, in the future we can report on that.
Just with regards to information on the website, given that Three Waters is now looking at private supplies, could we work alongside ECAN and have a one-stop station where we could have information from them about our first and second strata readings with regards to nitrate? Surely at ECAN they must have plotted the information from their wells, and it would be really helpful just to have a visual map for everybody to go online and actually understand where the pockets of high nitrate are actually occurring with regards to their drinking water.
Yeah, so ECAN do have it's either annual or biannual sort of groundwater nitrate mapping exercise, so we can link to that report on their website from ours. Yeah, happy to do that.
So land drainage is a short update. The annual land drainage activities are due to occur over the next 2 months, and the team are working with the land drainage committees and their contractors who undertake the work. And while we're doing this, we're also in the process of recording some of the best practice methodology and documentation at council that we can help roll out. Any questions? So stormwater, there's been a little bit of an update in the period since the report was written. And there have been a number of developments, particularly around the Leaston bypass, or the next stage of that. Unfortunately, the ongoing land negotiations have now reached the point where we've had to make this decision that construction of stage 4 will not be feasible prior to spring. The consent process is still ongoing, and in conjunction with the land negotiations and discussions, and we'll continue to work through this to programme the works in for as soon as possible. In the meantime, work is going to occur downstream at the Beetham Road culvert, and they've been planned and priced, and the team are ongoing with that. In Horata, we've now completed the works at Happy Jacks Creek, and we're working with ECAN in the process of doing the river clearing works, so that's ongoing. And the planning and pricing of the additional works in Horata is continuing. Any questions?
Yeah, just a question with Horata. Is there any chance that we could let the community know actually what's happening and where we are with all this? So that there's a lot of people ringing up all the time and asking, when some of these jobs are going to be getting done and that. And I think it would be handy, whether it's through the local committee or a newsletter or something, but I think it would be handy.
Yep.
Saying we are getting on with a lot of them and people don't realise.
And probably wonder with that, Bob, Stephen, whether something in council call could go out, and there's 2 great projects that are happening that people have been asking for a long time, the success in Leaston and all the work that's been done there, and tag on what's been going on in Horata and what still needs to be completed in Horata would be good.
Okay, so over the page 3.5 water races. This article is about the Upper Ellesmere water race closure. Part of the 2018 long-term plan, we were planning to work towards the closure of Upper Ellesmere water race network. Significant effort has been made towards this goal, but due to agreements with a third party, this has not progressed to completion, which is, it's been a lot of work going into it, but we haven't quite got there yet. So staff have been working on an alternative process to enable the closure of the Upper Ellesmere water race network. At the 10th of February meeting last month, Council appointed Councillor Lemon and Councillor Efiha to assist this process. We made some good progress on that. We've got a briefing paper and we hope to bring it to the 14th of April meeting. There is a bit of work to be done there, so it may be bumped one month, but we are making progress on that. Three Waters delivery, section 3.6. So on February the 1st, Southern Council submitted our detailed RFI workbook to the Department of Internal Affairs. We responded to review questions and we're just waiting for the outcome and presentations from that. But yeah, again, it's no short piece of work that. It was a gift that kept on giving. Canterbury review, following on the same extent. In February, we submitted our information to the Canterbury Reform Review. Consultants have responded with a package of information describing the financial and operational performance of all Canterbury councils. We've reviewed this information, provided some comments back to them, and we're waiting for some final outcomes that will get presented to council in due course.
The grey water stimulus package funding. So the project for the Darfield and Curwee to Pines pipeline, the design work for that is ongoing, and we're just continuing to tick through that. So there's, and we'll come back with further updates as required.
Perfect. And lastly, just the future points of discussion on section 4. You note that nitrate levels and trends in groundwater was identified as something we want to work on. And so once we have those results from our most recent sampling, we'll be able to present those back to council.
Thank you. Moved and seconded to receive the report. Lemon, Reid. Any further comments or discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Murray. Next item is 17, documents be signed and sealed, page 328. Mover and seconder, Bland and Gallagher. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Resolution to move from into public excluded. Moved Lyle, seconded Mugford. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And we'll just adjourn the meeting.